Hello and welcome to this music technology, A-level music technology lesson on MIDI. First, I'm going to talk about what MIDI is, bit of an overview, why we use it, and how we use it, and kind of where it came from as well. Then I will talk about more of the technical side of MIDI, sort of the different types of messages and data contained inside there. Then thirdly, I'm going to look at how we represent that in software, which is where you're going to come across it most often, and talk a little bit about the types of exam questions you could reasonably expect to get on it, and how to approach those. So let's start with the overview. So MIDI, in fact, the most important thing to say first is MIDI is not audio. It's easy we often treat them the same. We often use the same tools. We can cut, snip, move audio and MIDI, but MIDI is not audio. What MIDI is a series of instructions for an instrument, software or hardware, to follow. A series of instructions is in play this note now, play it like this, play it, or change this setting. And you're using MIDI, it's just information, it's just data, it's just instructions. So MIDI is a standardized language that all manufacturers of synthesizers, samplers, software or hardware agree to use, so all of the devices can talk to each other. In the bad old days of the Wild West, when synthesizers were first starting to become kind of popular things that people could afford multiples of, so I'm talking late 70s, early 80s, each company would have its own way of having its devices communicate with each other, more analog ways, using control voltage. So Moog would have one and Yamaha would have another type or something like that. Then it was agreed at some point, thanks a lot, I think, to Roland and like Dave Smith from Dave Smith Instruments, who made the profits at that sort of time, kind of clubbed together to agree a standardized language, a digital language. MIDI, by the way, stands for musical instrument digital interface. It is a digital interface for musical instruments, synthesizers and samplers mostly. And all it is a type of language, a series of instructions that all synths and samplers can follow. So when I press a key on my MIDI keyboard, which I think is contrasted out on this shot, I'm sending information about the key press. I'm not making a noise. That information will be received by an instrument, software mostly, but hardware. Here's a hardware synth with mirror image with MIDI inputs and a USB input, because more often than not nowadays, especially, MIDI is now carried by USB. The original MIDI ports were these little 5-pin digital plugs. You'd have an in and an out and a through, which would connect, daisy chain up multiple things, which I'll get to in a bit. And on the back of in fact, this is quite a modern one, doesn't even have a MIDI on it. It's just a USB out to the computer. But it doesn't matter. If you're sending MIDI via USB, you're still sending the exact same type of MIDI data that you would be if you were sending it via traditional MIDI cable. So that's what it does. Before, MIDI came in before computers were the standard way of producing music. I think maybe it crossed a little bit with the early days of some computers working like sequencers, but actually it was designed for hardware. It was designed for my one controller to control multiple synthesizers and samplers and a complete performance off one or two controllers. So that's something worth bearing in mind. Whilst computers use it, and it's now really established as the backbone of computer music, it's older than that. It's older than computer music is, really. So you can see elements of that. So I'm just going to cut over to my screen, shrink myself before we get a tunnel, and talk about the types of MIDI messages, a bit more of the technical side here. So when you send a MIDI message from a controller to an instrument, you send 3 bytes of data. Now, a byte is a very small bit of binary code. It's only 8 bits, and each bit is only a 0 or 1. So it's kind of 8 binary digits of information. Very, very small, tiny data. That makes it fast. That makes it very light for computers to use, which is very beneficial. But it also limits it. Kind of limits it to early 80s technology, and we're still sitting here in it's 2020 now, and they've just announced MIDI 3.0, by the way. So I don't know how long that will take to roll in. This is about MIDI 2, which is the standard that we were talking about. Decades and decades later, they finally decided maybe update MIDI, because actually it was really strong and it did what it needed to do. But these 3 tiny bytes of data are sent. And this is a table. The first byte of data instructs the receiving instrument what type of message is this. Incidentally, it also holds, I'll just put what channel it's sent on. It's just something I'll touch on. Actually, I'll do it now. Again, before computers, they wanted a way of making MIDI controllers control multiple instruments. So on stage, you might only have 1 or 2 keyboards, but you are making software, you're making music with lots of instruments. And they allowed for up to 16 different channels of MIDI. And what you would do is plug your one controller into the first synth, assign that MIDI channel 1, then use the through output that I just showed you on this. Wrong side. Through output to plug into your next thing and assign the next thing MIDI channel 2. So then when you send a MIDI channel 2 message from the controller, this would ignore it, pass it on to the 2 machine, all the way up to 16, which is a staggering amount of instruments to control from one keyboard, but it was possible, even if it would probably fry your brain trying to actually work it all out when you're actually in the middle of a performance. So the first byte of data would say, this is a note message on channel 1. Nowadays with computers, we use Omni a lot, which is just because they're just sending loads of messages with each channel. And that's because we don't need to do this sort of chaining up of devices so much anymore. Controllers are cheaper. We can just sort of send it all to Omni and arm the instrument we want in the software. The next 2 bytes of data, we literally just call data 1 and data 2. And these are the parameters, the information about the message. So let's talk through the types of message you've got. The first, I'm just going to color this a bit of something to make it stand out. Okay, the first type of message we have is possibly the most obvious, is the note message. And this occurs when you press a note. Makes sense. But it also contained on devices like this, which is a bit of a drum grid. These buttons each have a different note message being sent. When you press the buttons, each one will be different, just like each key has a different note. So data 1 in a note message is very simply which note is being pressed. What's important to note is data 1 and data 2 are always numbers between 0 and 127. That's all they know. They don't know about number 128. They've never heard of it. So when I'm writing which note, what's actually being sent is a number that's assigned to the note. So 64 is middle C. You press middle C, it sends 64, and it just goes up. So C sharp 65, 66 for the D. etc. It's worth memorizing 64 is middle C, because from there you can work out all the other notes. In an exam, if they do want to challenge you on that, work it out from there. And data 2 is how hard, which we actually call, and you hopefully have seen this term before, velocity. When I ask this question to a class, there's always the idea that data 2, when asked like, what do you think data 2 might be? The trap answer that someone always falls into is how long the note is. MIDI is real time. When you press a note, it doesn't know when you're going to let go of that note. You can't possibly say it's a quarter beat long, because it doesn't know that. And even if you're playing a piece of music that it knows, if you're a human, there's almost zero chance that you're actually going to let go of that at exactly a quarter beat. It will be microseconds either side, but it will be different every single time. So the 2 bits of data are which note and velocity. Velocity, again and always, a number between 1 and 127. And 127 being pressing the note as hard as I can, and 1 being pressing it as slowly and softly and gently as I can and barely audible. The reason I say 1 is that there's a special type of message that is sometimes shown to be a different message, but it's not different. It's actually just a note message called note off, in which case it is actually the same it's the same note message it does, and it just has a velocity of 0. So a note message with a velocity of 0 is what's called a note off. And when you let go of the key, basically it's saying 64 0, right? Note 64, 0 velocity, that's an off. So even though I've put on my table here, put it as a separate thing, these are the same. You literally cannot press a key at 0. Can't move 0 miles an hour. Right, so that's note on, note off, which are the most common types. But we also have other types of controller. Can I just lift this up? I hope you can see this. I can't see my screen anymore, so I think you can. We have, on your controller, you might find these knobs or faders or buttons to be pressing. And these are what are called continuous controllers. You will see this written down as CC nearly always. So I'll write CC. And it's a different type of message. So the first byte goes, this is a CC message on channel 1, 15, I don't care, something. And then it has 2 bytes of data. In this case, the first byte of data is saying which CC. Each one of these will have a different CC number assigned to it. I don't know what these numbers are off by heart, but they'll have a different one. They're probably something like 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So the first bit of data is which CC, and then the second bit of data is, let's call it amount. And that is where that dial is between 0 and 127, again, on its range. Buttons, by the way, there are buttons which are CC controllers. These just send 0 if up or 127 if pressed. And although these are called continuous controllers, that is the data isn't being sent continuously. The machine will assume that the instrument will assume that that controller hasn't been changed unless it receives a signal, which makes sense in the context of in the middle of a performance. What can happen and can cause confusion is that you have these sliders set up a bit or something, and then you load a new instrument which hasn't read these. It's not being sent again, so it doesn't know where they are. It doesn't know where these are positioned until you move one. So it won't know that I've got this fader all the way up, for instance, until I then move it. And that can cause some confusion, but generally speaking, the second you move it, it will then adapt to where it is, and then it will stay at the position until it receives a contrary message saying it's moved again. And CCs can be used to control loads of things. There are some standard CCs. Volume is always CC7. Sustain is CC64. Yes, I'm pretty sure. You don't actually need to memorize these, and I'll show you a trick later on where you'll get your answers if you're asked these things. But what you do want to know is some are standard and you can't change them. Modulation, which is a mod wheel you will often have next to a keyboard, that's CC1. And then there are, I don't know, say half of them which are freely assignable for you to, in conjunction with your instrument, decide that this controls filter cutoff and this controls, I don't know, filter envelope attack, whatever floats your boat. Next, I've written this in a smaller typeface. You have the program change message. Again, something that was really common and really important for hardware synthesizers and samplers, and now not so much in software. But you want to be aware of it. And it was just a way of changing the presets, the saved presets on the instruments that you're playing from your keyboard without having to go to the instrument. Just a way of making the performance quicker and smoother, and you don't have to go browsing through menus on a synthesizer off to the right when you're performing to, these were huge performances these things were in. So you could just quickly dial up a program change for, well, I say for bank whatever and patch number whatever. Again, a possibility of 128 banks, 0 to 127, and a possibility of 128 patches within each bank. The reason they did this was just to allow you to have more than 127 patches saved up. Program change would also send on channel as well. So you'd send it directly to the instrument. So you could have bank 1, patch 1 on channel 1 would be one instrument. Bank 1, patch 1 on channel 2 would be a different instrument. So banks, just however many patches, you have 128 patches in each bank, and you could have 128 banks. That's so many. I mean, things like this, which is a really modern, brand new synth. You can buy this now. It's a now synth. It's not an old classic. This has 4 banks. You just don't need 127. But, it was there in MIDI, even if it was never used. Last type of message, pitch bend. Pitch bend. Most controllers will have a pitch bend wheel. It's got a spring in it and it'll go back to the middle. And it is often thought, it's often thought that pitch bend is a CC, but that's not true, because 128 steps, 0 to 127, I'll keep saying that over and over and over again, isn't actually very much, especially when you're trying to get a smooth pitch bend over, say, an octave or more. You would hear those steps. You would hear it jump. There's nothing between those numbers. So you would hear do-do-do-do-do-do as you push the bend up, do-do-do-do-do, or do-do-do-do-do. You wouldn't hear the smooth do that you actually want with a pitch bend. So they needed to come up with a way of providing far, far more numbers than 128, 0 to 127. And they did this by multiplying data 1 and data 2 together, giving you a possibility of, I don't know, I've worked it out before, I'll work it out again, 127 times 127. It's not actually, it's 128 times 128. It's giving you 16,384 possible different numbers, which is a way of making your pitch bend sound very smooth. If you divide an octave up by 16,300, whatever it was, it will sound smooth to your ear. So these are just 2 numbers. The right one called most significant bit, the left one, the data 2 is the least significant bit. You'd see that as MSB and LSB. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you'd get tens of thousands of options to multiply these 2 numbers together to create a perfectly smooth pitch bend. Cool. So I don't know what to type here for that. Just numbers that times together. That just stays. Let's leave it blank. You know what I mean. Okay, part 3. Where to find these things on your software, what they'll look like, and how you may be asked about it in an exam. So this is what you're probably... I'm using Pro Tools. It doesn't matter if you've got Cubase, Logic, all of these things, they'll be there and they'll look roughly the same and they'll have words that are roughly similar. So I'm using Pro Tools. This is probably what you're most used to seeing. This is a piano roll editor. And it's got notes, all of the notes vertically stacked up and down. And along here, left to right, you have time. And it represents, this is something I just tapped in moments before starting to record this video. The MIDI that it's got saved graphically. It's worth noting that this isn't how the computer really reads it. What the computer sees is a list of commands, which kind of are really hard to find now. And not that long ago, you'd be able to actually bring up what was called a MIDI table to see all of these commands. Now, the best thing you get, and this is true for the other softwares I've seen, is something called an event list, which even this is masked slightly. So they give you, instead of data 1, they give you C3. They don't give me the number, whatever C3 is, 12 plus 64. They give you the velocity as a number, and they give you note length, which isn't true. There is no note length inside any of these notes. All that is doing is looking ahead for the next note off message, which we've discussed, and then doing a calculation and putting it in a table here for me to see. So it's a kind of a shame from a teaching point of view that you can't see this table on, I mean, Cubase I think had it, but then it's gone in the more recent versions I've seen, to replace with something more graphical, more user friendly, more understandable, right? So I totally get from a point of view of a user why. But this is a piano roll. Velocity is represented by color, or in Pro Tools, just kind of a shading of blue, which is a bit vague. Or you have these little lines down here which say how hard these keys have been pressed in velocity. Other MIDI information is put in. You can expand or change these little tracks down at the bottom. There's sustain, it is 64, that we can draw in as we so choose and set a value to. Sustain, or how many can I add on? Well, potentially 127. Mod wheel, for instance, and you can get a pen and draw or record the mod wheel in. Like that. If you see a score editor, here's one. That's no different. Doesn't show you velocity, which isn't particularly helpful, but all that is a graphical representation of the MIDI table. And it's same true in like proper score things in Sibelius and whatnot. They're just MIDI, and you're just creating a score. And underneath it, when it plays it back, it's using a MIDI table that you've created using a score editor. And what else might you see? You might see drum grids, which are, Pro Tools doesn't have one, but they replace the keys. It's just like a piano roll, but the keys are replaced with the names of drums. And that's a standard list now. You'll always find kick on C1 and the main snare on D1, hi-hat on, what's that, G flat, and these 3 here. And that's a standardized list in something called general MIDI. So it doesn't matter which instrument you plug in, those keys will play those drums. And they sometimes get rid of the perception of note length as well, and you just get like a dot or a diamond in Cubase, isn't it? Like a little diamond. There's still a note off message being sent. It's, I don't know when it is, moments later, because it doesn't matter with a drum. But it is important to note that a note off message is still being sent, even if you can't see it, or it isn't very obvious. And these are graphical representations. So what kind of questions might you get, and how would you answer them without having to memorize absolutely everything? So you might be asked, Practically, you might be asked to change or edit some MIDI, which you can do like audio. You just select it. I can make this, this is a minor. I can move this to a major arpeggio. I can change the velocities by grabbing down here. I can draw in pitch bends. Pitch bend. I can draw in a pitch bend using my draw tools. Actually, if you do draw in pitch bends, it's well worth noting that it doesn't automatically go back to 0. And if you don't put it back to 0 yourself, you're going to end up with out of tune instrument. By 0, I mean halfway. There it is. The actual physical controller on your keyboard has a spring that moves it back to 0 for you. But if you've drawn it in and you leave it up, you're in danger of having everything out of tune afterwards. So I can draw in my MIDI using this stuff. You might be asked questions like, what CC number is, what have I not said, volume? So you don't need to know this off by heart, but you need to know where to find it. So again, in these lanes down here, you can nearly always dig a little bit deeper. So Pro Tools and I think Cubase offers just a few of the most common ones up top. And then there's an option down here, add remove controllers. Again, it's similar in Cubase if it's not exactly the same, which gives me a complete list of all the controllers and their names. Again, like I said earlier, some are defined. They do not change and they've got names. Some are undefined and it just says undefined, in which case I can do what I want with. So what did I say? Volume, did I say? Which is a tough one because it's not here, because volume is always 7. And Pro Tools may be different to Cubase, puts out on its own channel. But let's say they've asked me, what is balance? I can look at this and go, balance is CC8, that's bracket 8. Or I could go down here. None of these are defined. Portamento is CC65. Legato foot switch is CC68. I doubt you'll ever be asked about those particular ones, but that information is available to you. It doesn't have to be in your memory. Just look for it. So again, they might ask you what is the velocity of this note, and you can select a note and hopefully find it up on the graphic somewhere. 72. It says it here, and for me here. And again, these things are they'll be there. They'll be on Logic, they'll be on Cubase, they may just be in a slightly different position, and you want to go and make sure you know how to find these things. Okay, good. So that's all I really wanted to say about MIDI. You want to be able to know this table and what types of data is being sent for the exam. You want to be able to know where to find the information in your DAW. You don't need to memorize all of the information, but you do need to know where to find your CC numbers, find your velocity, move notes, change notes, draw in new notes, and draw in CC controllers as well, and pitch bend. And you want to know that stuff. You may also be asked at some point maybe about actual converting this table into binary. As I said, this is not which note isn't the information, and number is being sent here, and it's actually being sent as binary data. And I'm going to do a different video on that, because for me it's a bit of a red herring, a bit of a distraction. So I'm going to do that as a different video. So switching me back, I hope that was useful to you. I hope that was good. Check out my page on Learn Music Technology site as well, where hopefully I've typed it up more concisely. Thanks.